of our providers in the community, they get better rates. So we set up this trust, and I'll acknowledge my wahine rangatira mahira who's involved with our trust, and we're moving carefully but slowly, but looking at the fundamental requirements for living. So you'll see a lot of people were going on during COVID that, oh, well, we need all this money like in New Zealand, etc., because we're not essential services. So what is essential? Kai, energy to keep us warm, housing, and water, but we've sort of put it under pūtaiao. So you'll see that lovely array of peru there that's grown by our kaumātua Hirini Tau and Kaikohe. So we're putting together a trust that actually builds out those spaces in partnership with Māori-led businesses preferentially. And if they're not Māori-led, then we're seeing how we can partner with those that are willing to work with us and treat us in the way that we want to be treated, because we're done with being treated like crap, aren't we? Yeah. And so just this picture here, we're building our whānau through the building of houses. And this is our rōpū here. And we've got Rhonda's team as well from the whānau Recovery Hub in Kaikohe with us, where we presented to Kelvin Davis a couple of months ago to see how we can use corrections funding as a preventative measure in terms of employment to give our people the tools so that they don't have to go to crime to make money. My cousin Jay Heppy, lays that on the line, and it's amazing when people just listen and walk away and they don't care. So Kay Marie asked us these questions. What should the government do? Understand the whakapapa of how we got here. So funding slithers like education on its own, or like MSD benefits on its own, or health on its own doesn't work. And I was a bit disappointed that there was a social investment program. It was Nationals, but I've read the original documentation and it was actually quite good. And I'm now looking at the wellbeing budget as part of my master's program and trying to see, is it just political propaganda, which I feel like it is, or and what should we be doing? So obviously I've put a group of people here, you can decide how you vote. And I've put this up because I know Moko's here, but what about councils? What role does councils have? And we've seen all the conundrums with the native trees in Auckland being torn down for urban development, yada yada, water exploitation all over across the motu. What can we do? Maybe a word or form to actually move things along as Māori. When I was at Harvard, I did a paper with the Kennedy School and worked with the Navajo Nation and economists from there, and we're looking at how do we drive, and it was Navajo-led economic development. And there was an example where they'd actually captured an entire region and they were gathering tax on that region. They were driving the district plan. So can we do that? Do you reckon? Great, thanks. So if we decide where we want the green space, we decide where we want building, we protect our water, etc. Thank you. And picture of my whanaunga here. Through social investment, commercial, the whole realm, it is a team game. And who better to put here than Nolene Taurua, one of our rangatira. And it's just key, just driving those points home. Know what we're actually good at and know what we're not good at. If we're not good at something, don't fake it. I'm kind of sick of Māori organisations, and I get it. There's a whole mana pride thing, legacy thing, but let's just be tika and pono. And I said this a couple of years ago to one of our iwi leaders, and they got a bit, anyway. Let's just be clear about what we're good at. If we're not good at it, bring in the experts. And there's usually somebody Māori who's expert at something. They might not be from our same iwi, but let's do that. Let's change the course of the future, because we're done with pretending. You can fake it for a tiny bit, but you actually need to bolster your team, your army, and then play your position. If you try and do someone else's position, you end up spreading yourself thin. And the other part is know when to take a rest, because if you keep plugging yourself, I'm living back home, and it's actually really tricky, because you can just see colonisation playing out in the way some of our people are thinking. people would rather grow gorse and tobacco weed on our whenua than have our own people tidy it up, live on there, develop it, etc., etc. So you can get really wound down in those spaces, and so know when to take a break, know when to puria, learn some karakia, learn some ways of healing yourself so you don't get caught up in everyone else's nānara. And I think that's something I've really realised I do, so I've had to literally go and take myself to the sea and do that. And the last couple of days have been spectacular. I've been with a group from Potama and the Māori and Hemp Innovation Group. So I'd actually heard Manukari, that was Pānapa's offsider, talking about their rural bioscience group. So we're down at Massey food technology space, talking about all different things from hemp to manuka honey with the Murray whānau, crickets, which are really high in protein, te mea. So I think when we can bring ourselves together and using all of our strengths from our whanaungatanga, knowing how we got to these spaces, knowing how when we interact through whakapapa, that you literally don't know who's related to somebody that you might have just known. And sometimes those things, if you think like LinkedIn, yes, it's a digital connectivity, but there's massive whakapapa that's available through there. And when we realise that, the amazing deals that can come about when we action ourselves through whakapapa. And I think the last thing I want to comment, and someone was talking about Mauri, I don't think she's still here, but wairua. And sometimes you just get that feeling that there's a hunch where you have to move, and then sometimes you're like, oh, no, actually I'm going to step back, have a rest over the weekend and figure out, should I partner with that person, should I invest in that, whatever it is, decision that you're making, but it's actually okay. And sometimes I literally had a dream a few weeks ago. I had somebody going on to me about a PhD, and then I dreamt about one of my tupuna, and I was like, I need to focus on that research for my PhD. So that whole realm, we can harness that in the way we move forward, and it actually makes us feel good. There's a little bit of research in that space. I'm aware, I can't quote the exact people, but I know there is. And I think we should be comfortable about harnessing that when we're making decisions, whether it's in the business realm or in our personal lives. And the last couple of slides, I just put this one up because it came up during COVID, but we know what's tika and pono. And so getting rid of the guy who's doing all the labour work, which is usually one of our whānau, is not the way to go. So let's be real about having these conversations, and is it actually we need to reprioritise. I know Mahira and etc. were talking about different types of economies. Let's really have those conversations at a real level, so we're not actually destroying our whānau's livelihood. And I'm happy that this conversation's already been had around VR, but I just wanted to make some points as data sovereignty is a space I've been involved in. So in terms of data sovereignty, we've got a group Te Rangatiratanga, which was set up largely to respond to Stats New Zealand's lack of ability to do census very well. And then we're now in a process trying to build capability and see how we can support things at a wider scale. But I would really encourage might even be yourself, or whānau hapu iwi, to really think about what mana motuhake is in terms of data sovereignty. Because I think data sovereignty as itself, it might be, certain Crown entities might just think it's having a conversation and seeing if you're okay with it. But if it's actually you owning the tech, you owning the data, you can do whatever you want with that data. If you want to sell it, you can sell it, or you can protect it, put it on a hoe or whatever. But be really bold about that space, because the big data economy is very lucrative. So there's huge risks about where we put our data, and so we must be really upfront when we're going into things like research agreements, etc., and where that data is going to be used. This IP thing came up at our ag business event yesterday, and be really bold. I'm just encouraging you to be really bold again about what you own as IP. And there was somebody there from Kāhui Legal, and I know they've been overlaying tikanga through that legal space. So we asked, the Research Institute had said, well, if you're using mātauranga to grow the food or whatever, and then we're going to process it in this part here in our factory or whatever it is, so then we'd own that bit, we're not going to touch your mātauranga. And then, so the question was posed, if whakapapa is overlaid through IP, that means that we would own the IP over the entire spectrum from food growing to market. So what does that look like? And the good news is the Kāhui legal person said that they were willing to work on something in that realm. So that's really exciting. So be bold about that. Don't let anybody take your IP or try and claim they own it, because they will. Lawyer up, that's the end. Lawyer up, it's worth it. And so just a few takeaway points. If it isn't working, who isn't at the table? And we've seen so many entities, organisations where, won't name a specific area, but where things aren't working, it's because the right people aren't at the table. There's solutions to everything, literally, but it's often personality that gets in the way of decision making. So figure out who's not at the table to move things forward. Our tupuna did things without any of the tech, any of the stuff that we have now. So if they were able to get across to New Zealand, then we should be as audacious as them, and we're way more capable with the tools we've got now. The other part is decide what success should look like, because if we don't measure it, we don't know what we're actually driving to, then it's going to be blurry, that road's going to be blurry, and who knows what's going to happen. That's what the government does with us. So let's actually decide what success looks like, assess how we're going and improve on it. And this is probably oops, that shouldn't be another one, but anyway, the best advice, I heard it from somebody, a Kiwi who's working over in the US at the moment, said when it's your turn to bat really hard. And so that's probably something that's really stuck with me, because there's times when you're put on the spot with a bunch of strangers, you don't know who they are, it might be funders, people who are going to employ you, whatever, bat the hell out of it. Just like your tupuna would have. That's it. All right.
Wow.